Frank Sinatra was famous not only for a voice that melted millions of hearts, but also for a lesser-known obsession, near absolute cleanliness. He changed clothes several times a day, was extremely sensitive to body odor, and was described by close friends as someone who could not tolerate any sign of disorder. In late-night conversations, when the stage lights had gone dark and alcohol began to speak, Sinatra would sometimes let slip harsh judgments about his relationships, especially with women. Not in the press, not in official memoirs, but in private confessions, he once mentioned a list of female stars who disappointed him because they failed to meet his almost unimaginable standards of hygiene. Those remarks later became a controversial part of the complex portrait of a legend. Rank number 5. Shelley Winters. Unrestrained chaos. In Frank Sinatra's memory, Shelley Winters did not represent uncleanliness in a simple sense, but rather the embodiment of a lifestyle completely opposed to the world of order and control he pursued throughout his life. Winters was the kind of woman who did not try to please anyone, especially men accustomed to imposing standards on others. To Sinatra, who changed clothes multiple times a day and viewed neatness as a form of personal morality, Shelley Winters was like a gust of chaos blowing straight into his deepest obsession. Stories surrounding Winters were often told by Sinatra in a tone that mixed irritation with helplessness. He was bothered by the way she lived, unconcerned with appearance, indifferent to polish, willing to leave her apartment in disarray and consider it perfectly normal. While Sinatra saw orderliness as a sign of respect for oneself and for others, Winters saw it as a form of artificiality she had no interest in participating in. Their clash was not merely about habits, but about a conflict between two philosophies of life. What is notable is that Shelley Winters was by no means passive in the face of Sinatra's discomfort. According to her own later accounts, Winters was keenly aware of his obsession with cleanliness and deliberately poked at it. She ate freely, without restraint, ordered the messiest possible dishes when dining with Sinatra, as a way of asserting that she did not exist to satisfy anyone's perfectionism. For Winters, it was a small but self-respecting act of rebellion. She would rather be judged as messy than become a version molded to please someone else. From today's perspective, the story between Sinatra and Shelley Winters says more about Sinatra. His discomfort did not stem solely from hygiene, but from his inability to control a woman who lived entirely on her own terms. Winters did not try to be pleasant, and that very refusal made her the first name on the list of women Sinatra could not reconcile with. Yet it was precisely that chaos that defined Shelley Winters as independent, instinctive, and unwilling to bow to the rigid standards of old Hollywood. Rank number 4. Zsa Gabor. When scent becomes a personality. To Frank Sinatra, Zsa Gabor was not simply a woman who wore too much perfume. She was the type of person whose very presence demanded that even the air around her bear her signature. Around Gabor, everything had a scent: sofas, bed linens, coats, even memories. And that was what unsettled Sinatra. Zsa Gabor did not believe in subtlety. She believed that a beautiful woman should be experienced through every sense, especially smell. Each perfume she wore was like an invisible cloak, meant to seduce, but also to announce her presence. To other men, it was an invitation of luxury. To Sinatra, it felt like being followed even after he had left. Sinatra once recounted that after every encounter with Gabor, he felt as though he never truly returned home. Her scent clung to his clothes, seeped into his closet, and lingered far longer than he found acceptable. Some smells do not evoke desire or comfort. They simply remind you that someone else has intruded too deeply into your private space. The anecdote about a tuxedo being destroyed does not only illustrate Sinatra's obsession with cleanliness, but also reflects his discomfort with traces he could not control. To him, clothes should carry his own scent, not anyone else's. A tuxedo that smelled wonderful but no longer belonged to him was meaningless. The moment that ended everything was not a major argument, but a small act. Zsa sprayed perfume onto the pillow he slept on, perhaps as an intimate gesture, a way to stay a little longer after leaving. But to Sinatra, it was not tenderness. It was a mark that was too obvious, too intentional, and too difficult to erase. In Sinatra's memory, Zsa Gabor was not a dirty woman. She was simply someone who never fully disappeared from a room, even after she had walked out. And sometimes what makes a relationship suffocating is not a lack of cleanliness, but the absence of space for the other person to breathe. Rank number 3, Judy Garland. The scent of fragility. On Frank Sinatra's list, Judy Garland was the name he found hardest to speak about, and also the one that made his remarks the most ambiguous. There was no overt disgust, no biting mockery. Instead, there was a different kind of discomfort, one that could not be clearly named, as if he were sensing sorrow rather than a bodily scent. Sinatra once described Judy Garland as carrying the smell of medication, hard liquor, and anxiety. But when those elements are separated, it becomes clear that this was not an issue of hygiene, but the residue of a life worn down. Garland lived in a body perpetually tense, a mind that never truly rested. Drugs to sleep, to wake, to remain standing on stage had become inseparable from who she was, like breath itself. Beside Garland, Sinatra felt a strange heaviness, not because she was unattractive, but because she was too real. Garland did not hide her exhaustion, could not conceal the tremor in her voice, and lacked the ability to play okay in real life the way she did on stage. Her body told a story without words, that of a woman constantly fighting just to appear before the public as if everything were fine. What unsettled Sinatra was not Garland herself, but the familiarity she evoked. Both were artists who lived on emotion. Both had histories with alcohol, loneliness, and the pressure to please audiences. But while Sinatra tried to control everything through discipline and order, Garland reflected a possibility of collapse that he did not want to confront. It is said that scent has the power to awaken memory more strongly than images. With Judy Garland, everything seemed to awaken at once for Sinatra. Insecurity, fear of losing control, and the realization that the glow of the stage did nothing to protect a person from inner wounds. Perhaps for that reason, his remarks about Garland carried more defensiveness than judgment. Judy Garland was not ranked by Sinatra because she lacked appeal or self-care. She appeared on that list because she carried too much truth, too many traces of a life exploited to its limits. And sometimes what makes someone turn away is not the smell of a body, but the scent of pain that feels all too familiar. Rank number 2, Marilyn Monroe. When legend collides with human reality. On Frank Sinatra's controversial list, Marilyn Monroe is the name that surprises people the most. Not because she lacked allure. On the contrary, Marilyn was the embodiment of American beauty in the collective imagination, but because of the painful gap between the flawless image the public worshipped and the flesh and blood person behind the lights. To Sinatra, a man who sought absolute control in every personal experience, Marilyn represented the one thing he struggled most to accept, the very real fragility of a human being living inside the shell of an icon. Frank Sinatra was accustomed to women perfectly packaged by Hollywood, meticulously made up, carefully calculated fragrances, everything kept within safe boundaries. Marilyn Monroe was different. She worked for hours under scorching lights, endured crushing pressure from film crews, from the press, and from the very sex symbol image she was never allowed to escape. In rare private moments, Marilyn was not a flawless poster. She was tired, anxious, and did not hide the fact that she too had deeply human limits. What unsettled Sinatra was not Marilyn herself, but the collapse of an illusion. According to close friends, he once said that Marilyn disillusioned him, not because she was less attractive, but because she was too real. Her scent, as Sinatra described it, was a mixture of expensive perfume and the traces of a long, exhausting day. This was not a criticism of hygiene in the usual sense, but the reaction of a man who could not tolerate seeing an icon pulled back down to the ground. What stands out here is that Sinatra seemed unwilling to allow Marilyn to be an ordinary human being. He loved her image, but felt uneasy confronting the biological, emotional, and mental reality that image never reflected. For someone obsessed with perfection and order like Sinatra, Marilyn became a mirror reflecting an uncomfortable truth. Even the greatest symbols cannot escape fatigue, stress, and the fragility of the human body. Looking back today at this second ranking, many people realize the story says nothing negative about Marilyn Monroe. On the contrary, it reveals the terrible price she paid to maintain an image that never allowed her to be weak. While Sinatra could complain to friends after late nights, Marilyn had to live her entire life under relentless scrutiny, where every sign of imperfection was treated as a flaw. That is what makes this story sad rather than shocking. Rank number 1, Ava Gardner. When scent becomes emotional memory. Ava Gardner tops this list not because she was worse than the others, but because for Frank Sinatra, no one left a deeper and more complex emotional imprint. This is not a story about hygiene, nor is it a simple slight. With Ava, every remark Sinatra made was inseparable from love, hurt, and a sense of helplessness he never truly overcame. The relationship between Sinatra and Ava Gardner was famously intense, passionate, and full of conflict. They fell in love when both were at emotional peaks, but far from stable states of mind. Ava lived freely, fiercely, refusing to be confined. Sinatra was the opposite, controlling, sensitive, and determined to keep everything within reach. That contrast created their attraction, and also the source of every collision. When Sinatra spoke of Ava, he could not separate her from the very real habits of her life. Alcohol, cigarettes, long sleepless nights, sudden bursts of anger that faded just as quickly. To him, Ava carried the marks of an emotional battlefield, where every encounter revived both love and pain. Crucially, Sinatra did not speak of this with disgust, but with obsession. Ironically, the very things he complained about were what he could never let go of. Ava did not try to become a more agreeable version of herself to please Sinatra. She did not reshape herself to accommodate his obsessions. And that left Sinatra both longing and powerless. In his world, where everything needed to be neatly arranged, Ava was a storm that could not be tamed. Placing Ava Gardner at the top, therefore, carries a very different meaning. She is not first because she was the least clean, but because she was the only woman who tied all of Sinatra's senses to his deepest emotional memories. His remarks about Ava say far more about himself, a man who could control the stage, the music, and the audience, but was utterly helpless before a woman who refused to live by any standards other than her own. In retrospect, Ava Gardner was not defined by Frank Sinatra's private whispers. She is remembered as a symbol of freedom, instinct, and raw vitality. And perhaps because he could never control Ava, Sinatra carried her image with him longer than anyone else, not as a clean or comfortable memory, but as an emotion that never faded. Psychologists suggest that Sinatra's obsession with cleanliness was not merely a personal habit, but a mechanism of control. When confronted with women who made him feel vulnerable, he focused on physical details to reclaim the upper hand. By weaponizing his own sensitivity, he avoided facing deeper emotions, where he was no longer in control of the game. These stories must be understood in the context of mid-20th century Hollywood, where power rested almost entirely in the hands of men. Figures like Sinatra could make harsh judgments without being subjected to similar scrutiny. Female stars worked long hours under hot lights in restrictive costumes, yet were still expected to remain perfectly flawless. Meanwhile, no one openly discussed Sinatra's own drinking, smoking, or lifestyle. Ultimately, history does not remember Shelley Winters, Judy Garland, Marilyn Monroe, or Ava Gardner for Frank Sinatra's private judgments. They are remembered for their talent, influence, and the cultural marks they left behind. Sinatra's remarks, in hindsight, reveal more about his own emotional limitations than about the women themselves. He could sing about love and the stars, yet struggled to accept the very human imperfections within intimate relationships. And perhaps it is that contradiction that makes Frank Sinatra both great and deeply flawed.